The wind howled like a pack of wolves as the stagecoach lurched to a stop outside the weathered building that served as Leavenworth's depot. And Katherine Preston pressed her trembling hands against the frost-covered window, wondering if she had made the biggest mistake of her life. Snow swirled through the air in thick curtains, obscuring everything beyond a few feet from the coach. She could barely make out the shadowy outline of buildings along what she assumed was the main street. Her threadbare wool dress provided little warmth, and her only other possessions, a tattered shawl and a small cloth bag containing a tortoiseshell comb that had belonged to her mother, seemed pitiful preparations for starting a new life on the Kansas frontier. The bag had torn during the journey, and she had lost even the few spare buttons and the single handkerchief she had carefully packed. "End of the line, miss," the driver called down, his voice muffled by the wind. Katherine drew a shaky breath and pushed open the door, immediately gasping as the bitter cold struck her like a physical blow. It was December of 1867, and this was nothing like the winters she had known in Philadelphia. She climbed down carefully, her worn boots sinking into snow that reached nearly to her knees. The driver handed down nothing because there was nothing to hand down. She stood there with only the clothes on her back and the small bag clutched in her freezing fingers. "You meeting someone?" the driver asked, his weathered face creased with concern. "Yes," Katherine said, though her voice lacked conviction. "A Mr. Yates Ormond. He should be expecting me." The driver nodded and pointed toward a building across the street. "That would be the general store. Most folks check there first. Good luck to you, miss. Get inside quick before you freeze." He climbed back up to his seat, and the coach rumbled away, leaving Katherine alone in the swirling snow. She wrapped her inadequate shawl tighter around her shoulders and trudged toward the store, each step requiring effort as the wind pushed against her. Her fingers had already gone numb, and she could barely feel her feet. The door to the general store opened before she reached it, and a man stepped out, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a heavy sheepskin coat and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the storm. He stopped when he saw her, his eyes widening slightly as he took in her appearance, the thin dress, the worn shawl, the absence of any trunk or carpet-bag. "Katherine Preston?" he asked, his voice deep and careful. "Yes," she managed, her teeth chattering. "Mr. Ormond." "Yates," he said, closing the distance between them in 3 long strides. He shrugged out of his coat without hesitation and wrapped it around her shoulders. The sudden warmth was overwhelming, and she felt tears prick her eyes. The coat smelled of leather and wood smoke, and something distinctly masculine that she could not name. "Your belongings?" he asked, looking past her toward where the stagecoach had disappeared into the white curtain of snow. "I have none," Katherine said quietly, ashamed. "I lost everything when the boarding house where I was staying caught fire. I barely escaped with my life. I wrote to you, but I suppose the letter did not arrive before I did." She waited for anger, for disappointment, for him to tell her this arrangement would not work. Instead, Yates looked at her for a long moment, his gray eyes thoughtful beneath the brim of his hat. Then he said something that made her breath catch for an entirely different reason than the cold. "You brought enough." Katherine stared at him, certain she had misheard over the wind. "I beg your pardon, you brought enough," Yates repeated, his voice firm and sincere. "You are here. That is what matters. Now let us get you inside before this storm gets worse." He placed a hand on her elbow, steadying her as they made their way back across the street. Katherine found herself leaning against him, drawing strength from his solid presence. They entered a small restaurant that was blessedly warm, and Yates guided her to a chair near the pot-bellied stove in the corner. "Coffee," he told the woman behind the counter. "Hot as you can make it. And soup if you have any ready." "Coming right up, Yates," the woman said, eyeing Katherine with frank curiosity. Yates pulled a chair close to Katherine and sat down, studying her face with concern. "Can you feel your hands?" She shook her head. He reached out and took her frozen fingers between his own hands, which were large and calloused but surprisingly gentle. He began rubbing warmth back into them carefully, and Katherine felt a strange flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with the cold. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I know this is not what you expected when you sent for a bride." "What did the letter from the agency tell you about me?" Yates asked, still working on her hands. "That you owned a ranch outside of Leavenworth. That you were 30 years old and in need of a wife to help manage the household. That you were a man of good character and sober habits." She paused. "They said nothing about you being kind." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or sadness. "Kindness should not be remarkable. But it is," Katherine said softly, "at least in my experience." The coffee arrived, and Yates wrapped her hands around the warm cup, making sure she had a firm grip before he let go. Katherine sipped it gratefully, feeling the heat spread through her body. She studied him over the rim of the cup, taking in details she had been too cold to notice before. He had a strong face, weathered by sun and wind, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often. His hair was dark brown, slightly too long, and his beard was neatly trimmed. He wore simple clothes beneath his vest, a flannel shirt and sturdy work pants tucked into boots that had seen plenty of use. "How old are you?" Yates asked. "The agency said 20, but I want to hear it from you." 21 as of last month," Katherine said. "And you are truly 30. "I am. Turned 30 last spring." He leaned back in his chair. "Tell me about the fire." Katherine took another sip of coffee, gathering her thoughts. "I was working as a seamstress in Philadelphia, saving money for the journey west. I had some debts to settle first. My father died 2 years ago and left considerable medical bills. I was living in a boarding house in a less expensive part of the city. 3 weeks ago, a fire started in the kitchen in the middle of the night. By the time we realized what was happening, the flames had spread through most of the building. I got out through a window in my nightdress. A neighbor woman gave me the dress I am wearing now and the shawl. I had just enough money on my person to purchase the stagecoach ticket. Everything else, all my clothes, my sewing supplies, the letters you had sent, it all burned." She did not mention the terror of that night, the screams of the other boarders, the way the smoke had choked her lungs. She did not mention that 2 people had died in that fire, or that she still woke sometimes gasping for air, imagining flames licking at her heels. Yates was quiet for a moment. "You could have written to postpone the journey, taken time to prepare properly." "I had nothing left in Philadelphia," Katherine said simply. "No family, no friends who could help, no prospects. Coming here seemed like the only path forward. I hoped you would understand, but I knew it was possible you would turn me away. I was prepared to seek work in town if necessary." "I will not turn you away," Yates said firmly. "We had an agreement, and I am a man of my word. Besides, you have shown considerable courage in coming all this way despite your circumstances. That speaks well of your character." The soup arrived, a hearty beef and vegetable stew that smelled like heaven. Katherine ate slowly, trying not to seem too eager even though she was ravenous. She had eaten sparingly during the journey, trying to make her limited funds last. "I should tell you about the ranch," Yates said, watching her eat. "It is not fancy, but it is mine, free and clear. I have 300 acres of good grazing land and a herd of about 200 cattle. The house is small, just 4 rooms, but it is sturdy and well built. I have 2 men who work for me, Tom and Lewis. They live in the bunkhouse. We raise cattle and horses, and I do some work as a farrier when needed. It is a good life, but it is hard work. "I am not afraid of hard work," Katherine said. "I have been supporting myself since I was 16. "The isolation might be difficult," Yates continued. "The ranch is about 5 miles from town. In weather like this, we can be cut off for days at a time. The winters are harsh here." "I have nowhere else to go," Katherine said honestly. "And I will do my best to be a good wife to you, Mr. Ormond. I can cook and clean, and so I will earn my place." "Yates," he corrected gently. "If we are to be married, you should call me Yates." "Katherine," she offered in return, "or Kate if you prefer." "Katherine suits you," he said, and there was something warm in his voice that made her pulse quicken. They finished their meal in companionable silence, and then Yates stood. "I need to get some supplies from the general store before we head to the ranch. You will need warmer clothes immediately. Mrs. Brennan keeps a selection of ready-made dresses and such." "I have no money to pay for them," Katherine said, embarrassed. "You are to be my wife," Yates said matter-of-factly. "It is my responsibility to provide for you. Come on, let us see what we can find." The general store was warm and crowded with goods. Mrs. Brennan, a plump woman with shrewd eyes and a kind smile, took charge of Katherine immediately, clucking over her thin dress and chattering about the weather. Within an hour, Katherine found herself outfitted with 2 warm wool dresses, a heavy cloak, proper boots, undergarments, a nightgown, and various other necessities. Yates paid for everything without comment, adding supplies for the ranch flour, sugar, coffee, ammunition, and other staples. "When is the wedding to be?" Mrs. Brennan asked as she wrapped the purchases. Yates looked at Katherine. "That depends. We could go to the Justice of the Peace today, or we could wait a few days so you can rest and recover from your journey. Whatever you prefer." Katherine considered. Part of her wanted to delay, to have time to prepare herself for this monumental step. But another part knew that waiting would only increase her anxiety. Besides, if they were married, her position would be secure. She would truly belong somewhere. "Today," she said quietly. "If that is acceptable to you." "Today it is, then," Yates agreed. He turned to Mrs. Brennan. "Could you send word to Judge Harrison? Ask if he would be available this afternoon." Mrs. Brennan's eyes lit up with excitement. "Of course. Oh, how wonderful. We do not see many weddings in the winter." "I will close the store and stand as witness if you like." "We would appreciate that," Yates said. An hour later, Katherine stood in the small room that served as Judge Harrison's office, wearing one of her new wool dresses, a deep blue that brought out her eyes, and trying to calm her racing heart. Yates stood beside her, having cleaned up and changed into what were clearly his best clothes, a white shirt, dark vest, and a string tie. He had even trimmed his beard. Judge Harrison was a portly man with white whiskers and a booming voice. "Do you, Yates Ormond, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do," Yates said, his voice steady and sure. "And do you, Katherine Preston, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Katherine looked up at Yates, at this stranger who had shown her more kindness in a few hours than she had known in years. She thought about the fire, about everything she had lost, about the desperate gamble she had taken in coming west. She thought about his words, "You brought enough," and the way he had looked at her, as if she were valuable just as she was. "I do," she said, and meant it. "Then, by the power vested in me by the state of Kansas, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Yates bent down and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, a gesture that was both chaste and oddly intimate. Katherine felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of the tight knot of fear she had carried for so long. They signed the marriage certificate, Mrs. Brennan and Judge Harrison witnessing, and then they were outside again in the swirling snow. Yates loaded the supplies into a sturdy wagon hitched to 2 strong horses, then helped Katherine up onto the seat. He climbed up beside her and spread several blankets over their laps. "The ranch is about an hour's drive in good weather," he said, taking up the reins. "In this storm, it might take twice that. Stay close to me and keep those blankets tight." The journey was brutal. The wind seemed determined to tear them from the wagon seat, and the snow fell so thickly that Katherine could barely see the horses. She huddled against Yates, grateful for his solid warmth beside her. He drove with confident skill, guiding the horses along a road that was barely visible. "How can you tell where we are going?" Katherine shouted over the wind. "Know every inch of this route," Yates called back. "Could drive it blindfolded. We are almost to the creek crossing, and then it is just another mile." True to his word, they forded a shallow creek, the water frozen at the edges but still running in the middle, and then climbed a gentle rise. Through the driving snow, Katherine caught glimpses of a house and barn, both looking solid and well-maintained despite the storm. Yates pulled the wagon up as close to the house as possible and jumped down. He came around to Katherine's side and lifted her down as if she weighed nothing, then half-carried her through the deep snow to the door. He kicked it open and brought her inside, setting her on her feet in a small but tidy front room. "Stay here," he said. "I need to get the horses settled and unload the supplies." "I can help," Katherine protested, but Yates shook his head. "You have been through enough today. Get warm." "I will be back soon." He disappeared back into the storm, leaving Katherine alone in what was now her home. She looked around slowly, taking in the details. The front room served as a parlor with a stone fireplace, a well-worn sofa, 2 chairs, and a small bookshelf. Through a doorway, she could see a kitchen with a large iron stove and a table with 4 chairs. 2 other doors led to what must be the bedrooms. Everything was clean but sparse, with the utilitarian simplicity of a place where a man lived alone. There were no curtains on the windows, no rugs on the floor, no decorative touches of any kind. It was shelter, not a home, and Katherine felt a sudden determination to change that. She found kindling and logs beside the fireplace and managed to get a fire started, grateful for the skills she had learned during leaner times. The flames caught and began to spread warmth through the room. She was searching for something to make coffee with when Yates returned, stamping snow from his boots. "Horses are settled and the supplies are in the kitchen," he said. "Tom and Lewis are snowed in at the bunkhouse. We will not see them until the storm passes." He paused. "I should have mentioned earlier we will have the house to ourselves for a few days." Katherine felt a flutter of nervousness but pushed it aside. "I was trying to make coffee. I could not find the pot." "Let me show you where things are," Yates said, moving into the kitchen. He began opening cupboards and drawers, explaining his simple organizational system. Katherine paid close attention, noting where he kept the dishes, the cooking implements, the food stores. "I am not much of a cook," Yates admitted. "I can make basic things, but nothing fancy." "I was hoping you might be better at it than me." "I learned to cook when I was young," Katherine said. "My mother died when I was 12, and my father was not capable of managing the household. I will prepare something for supper." "I will bring in more wood first," Yates said. "This storm is going to last through the night at least. We will need to keep the fires going." While Yates was outside, Katherine explored the kitchen more thoroughly. She found salt pork, beans, flour, cornmeal, and various other staples. In the cold box outside the back door, there was butter, milk, and eggs. She could work with this. By the time Yates came back in with an armload of firewood, Katherine had a pot of beans simmering on the stove and was mixing cornbread. He watched her work for a moment, something unreadable in his expression. "You did not have to start right away," he said. "You must be exhausted." "Keeping busy helps," Katherine said honestly. "It keeps me from thinking too much." Yates nodded slowly. I understand that. He hesitated, then said, I should show you the rest of the house, our sleeping arrangements. Catherine's hand stilled in the cornmeal. All right. She followed him to one of the two doors off the main room. He opened it to reveal a small bedroom with a single bed, a dresser, and a washstand. This was my room, he said. I have been sleeping here since I built the house 3 years ago. He closed that door and opened the other one. This room was slightly larger, with a double bed covered in a simple quilt, another dresser, and a larger washstand with a mirror above it. A window looked out over what Katherine assumed was the front of the property, though all she could see now was swirling white. I prepared this room when I knew you were coming, Yates said. I thought we could share it as husband and wife, but if you would prefer to take time before we— That is, if you need your own space for a while, you can have this room and I will stay in the smaller one. I will not force anything on you, Katherine. I want you to know that. Katherine looked at the bed, at this room that was meant to be theirs together, and thought about what it meant to be married. She had known when she agreed to this arrangement that it would include physical intimacy. The idea frightened her. She knew little about such things beyond vague warnings and crude jokes she had overheard, but she also understood that it was part of the bargain she had made. More than that, though, something in her wanted to trust this man who had been nothing but kind to her, who had seen her at her most desperate and vulnerable, and had said she was enough just as she was. I think we should share the room, Katherine said quietly. We are married. It would be strange to live as strangers under the same roof. Are you certain? Yates asked, searching her face. I do not want you to feel obligated. I am certain, Katherine said, with more confidence than she felt. But I should tell you I do not know much about what happens between a husband and wife. I may need patience. I can be patient, Yates said gently. There is no rush for anything. Tonight let us just rest. It has been a long day for both of us. They ate supper together at the kitchen table, the wind howling outside while the house remained warm and secure. Catherine's cornbread turned out well, and Yates complimented her cooking sincerely. They talked cautiously, like two people learning a new language, sharing small details about their lives. Yates told her about growing up in Missouri, about working as a ranch hand for 10 years before saving enough to buy his own land. He spoke of his parents, both dead now, and a sister back east who was married with children of her own. He had served briefly in the Union Army during the war, though he did not elaborate on his experiences, and Katherine did not press. Katherine told him about Philadelphia, about her father who had been a clerk until illness took him, about the years of struggling to keep them fed and housed. She spoke of her mother only briefly. The memories were too precious and painful to share with someone she had just met. She explained her work as a seamstress, the long hours and poor pay, the boarding house full of other women in similar straits. You have had a hard life, Yates observed. No harder than most, Katherine said. I survived. That is more than some can say. You did more than survive, Yates said. You found the courage to take a chance on something new. That takes strength. After supper, Katherine cleaned the dishes while Yates checked the fires and brought in more wood. The storm showed no signs of abating, but inside the house, everything felt safe and warm. When the chores were done, they stood awkwardly in the main room, both aware that the evening was drawing to a close. I will give you some privacy to prepare for bed, Yates said. I need to check on the animals one more time. He pulled on his heavy coat and went back out into the storm. Katherine hurried to the bedroom and changed into her new nightgown, grateful for its thick flannel in the cold. She took down her hair from its simple bun and brushed it out, then climbed into the bed. The sheets were cold, and she shivered as she pulled the quilts up to her chin. When Yates returned, she heard him moving around the house, banking the fires for the night. Then he came into the bedroom, carrying a candle. He set it on the dresser and began to undress unself-consciously, stripping down to his union suit. Katherine watched him through lowered lashes, curious despite her nervousness. His body was lean and muscular from hard work, his movements economical and efficient. He blew out the candle and climbed into bed beside her, the mattress dipping under his weight. For a long moment they lay there in the darkness, not touching, both acutely aware of the other's presence. "Katherine," Yates said softly. "Yes. Thank you for agreeing to marry me today. I know it was not the wedding you probably dreamed of as a girl." "I stopped having those dreams a long time ago," Katherine said honestly. "Today was more than I expected. You have been kinder to me than anyone has been in years. I will try to be a good wife to you, Yates. I promise." "And I will try to be a good husband," Yates said. He reached out cautiously and found her hand under the covers, lacing his fingers through hers. "We will figure this out together." Katherine held onto his hand like a lifeline and closed her eyes. The storm raged outside, but inside, she felt something unfamiliar and precious beginning to grow the fragile first shoots of hope. She woke in the morning to gray light filtering through the window and the warm pressure of Yates' arm around her waist. Sometime during the night they had moved together, seeking warmth, and now she was tucked against his chest with his body curved protectively around hers. For a moment, she lay still, savoring the feeling of being held, of not being alone. Then Yates stirred and she felt him wake. His arm tightened briefly around her, then he pulled back. "Morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "Good morning," Katherine replied, turning to face him. In the dim light, she could see his face more clearly than she had been able to the day before. He had strong features and surprisingly kind eyes, and his hair stuck up in several directions, making him look younger than his 30 years. "Storm is still blowing," Yates observed, looking toward the window. "We will be staying close to the house today. What needs to be done?" Katherine asked. "I will need to check on the cattle and make sure they have access to water and shelter. The horses need tending. Beyond that, it is mostly about staying warm and dry." He paused. "You do not need to get up yet if you do not want to. It is early still." But Katherine was already pushing back the covers. "I am awake now. I will start breakfast while you tend the animals." They moved through the morning in a comfortable rhythm, each focusing on their tasks. Katherine made oatmeal and coffee, finding her way around the kitchen with increasing confidence. When Yates came back in from his chores, his face red from the cold and snow caked on his coat, she had hot food waiting. "This is good," Yates said after his first bite. "Better than anything I have made in years." "It is only oatmeal," Katherine said, but she felt pleased nonetheless. "Good oatmeal," Yates insisted. He paused. "I was thinking once the storm passes and we can get to town, we should get you some fabric and supplies. Mrs. Brennan mentioned you were a seamstress. If you want to make curtains or such for the house, I want you to feel free to do that, make this place more of a home." "I would like that," Katherine said softly, "if you are certain about the expense." "The ranch does well enough," Yates assured her. "We are not rich, but we are comfortable. I want you to have what you need." They spent the day inside while the storm continued its assault. Yates had work to do repairing a bridle, checking his accounts, cleaning his rifle, and Katherine began the process of truly learning her new home. She scrubbed the kitchen from top to bottom, organized the pantry more efficiently, and took stock of what supplies they had and what they would need. In the afternoon, she found Yates in the main room, sitting by the fire and reading a book. He looked up when she entered. "What are you reading?" she asked. He showed her the cover. "Washington Irving, Tales of the Alhambra. Have you read it?" "No," Katherine admitted. "I have read very little beyond the Bible and newspapers. Books were a luxury we could not afford." I have a decent collection, Yates said, gesturing to the bookshelf. You are welcome to any of them. I could read aloud to you in the evenings if you like. It is something I enjoy, but it feels foolish doing it alone. I would like that very much, Katherine said, touched by the offer. So began a pattern that would continue through the long days of the storm. During the day, they worked at their separate tasks, learning to move around each other in the small space. In the evenings, after supper was cleared away, they sat by the fire and Yates read aloud, his deep voice bringing the stories to life. Katherine found herself looking forward to these evening hours more than she wanted to admit. At night, they lay in the bed they now shared, talking quietly in the darkness. Yates told her about the ranch, about his hopes for expanding the herd and maybe adding some sheep. Katherine shared her dreams of having a real garden in the spring, of maybe raising chickens for eggs. They spoke of small, ordinary things, and in doing so began to weave the threads of their lives together. On the third night, Yates reached for her hand again under the covers and Katherine moved closer, resting her head on his shoulder. He froze for a moment, then relaxed, his arm coming around her. "Is this all right?" Katherine whispered. "Yes," Yates said, his voice tight with some emotion she could not name. "This is very all right." The fourth morning dawned clear and bright, the storm finally spent. The world outside was blanketed in white, the snow piled high against the buildings and sculpted into fantastic shapes by the wind. Yates went out after breakfast to check on Tom and Lewis, and returned an hour later with both men in tow. Tom was older, probably in his 50s, with gray streaking his brown hair and deep lines in his weathered face. Lewis was younger, perhaps 25, with dark eyes and a ready smile. Both men removed their hats when they saw Katherine and greeted her respectfully. "Madam," Tom said, nodding, "we heard the boss got himself married. Congratulations to you both." "Thank you," Katherine said, suddenly shy. "Would you like some coffee? I have just made a fresh pot." "That would be most welcome," Lewis said warmly. They sat around the kitchen table, and Katherine served coffee and the molasses cookies she had made the day before with supplies from Yates' well-stocked pantry. The men ate appreciatively, and Katherine felt a warm glow of satisfaction at their compliments. "We will need to check the herd today," Yates said. "Make sure none of the cattle got into trouble during the storm. Katherine, will you be all right here alone for a few hours?" "Of course," Katherine said. "I have plenty to keep me busy." She watched from the window as the three men rode out, Yates on a big bay gelding that moved with power and grace. When they were out of sight, she turned back to the house and began planning. She wanted to surprise Yates, to show him that she could truly make this place a home. She started with the bedroom, shaking out the quilts and airing them by the fire, washing the sheets and hanging them to dry on a line Yates had strung in the kitchen for winter laundry. She scrubbed the floors, polished the mirror, and organized the dresser. In the main room, she rearranged the furniture slightly to make better use of the space, and she carefully dusted Yates' small collection of books. In the kitchen, she took inventory of the supplies and began planning meals for the week. There was salt pork and dried beef, beans and flour and cornmeal. She found a crock of sauerkraut in the cold cellar, along with jars of preserved tomatoes and peaches. With these ingredients, she could make hearty, satisfying meals. By the time the men returned in the late afternoon, Katherine had a beef stew simmering on the stove and fresh bread cooling on the counter. Yates came in stamping snow from his boots, his face glowing from the cold and exercise. "Something smells amazing," he said, inhaling deeply. "Supper will be ready soon," Katherine said. "How was the herd?" "We lost 2 calves," Yates said, his expression sobering. "But it could have been much worse. The rest are in good shape." We moved them closer to the barn where they will have better shelter if another storm comes through. Over supper, the men discussed the ranch work, and Katherine listened carefully, learning about this new world. She began to understand the rhythm of ranch life, the constant attention required to keep the animals healthy and the property maintained. It was hard work, she could see, but there was satisfaction in it too. After Tom and Lewis returned to the bunkhouse, Katherine and Yates fell back into their evening routine. But tonight, something felt different. There was a new awareness between them, a tension that had been building over the past few days. Yates seemed to feel it too. When they went to bed, he pulled her close immediately, and Katherine went willingly, craving the warmth and comfort of his embrace. She tilted her head back to look at him in the dim light from the dying fire, and found him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Katherine," he said softly, "may I kiss you, properly I mean." In answer, she reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. Yates bent his head and pressed his lips to hers, gentle at first, then with growing passion. Katherine had been kissed before, fumbling, unpleasant encounters with men who had seen her as an easy target because of her poverty, but this was entirely different. This was warmth and desire, and something that made her heart race and her body come alive. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "I have been wanting to do that since the moment I saw you step off that stagecoach," he admitted. "Even though I looked like a half-frozen waif with nothing to my name?" Katherine asked. "Especially then," Yates said. "You looked so brave and so frightened at the same time. I wanted to protect you. I wanted to prove to you that coming here was the right choice." "It was the right choice," Katherine whispered. "I am beginning to believe that with all my heart." They kissed again, and this time, Yates' hands began to explore, sliding over her nightgown, learning the shape of her. Katherine responded tentatively, her own hands discovering the warmth of his skin beneath the thin fabric of his union suit. She was nervous but not afraid. This was her husband, and she wanted this, wanted him. "We can stop any time," Yates murmured against her neck. "Just say the word." "I do not want to stop," Katherine said, surprising herself with her certainty. What followed was awkward at times, both of them learning each other, but it was also tender and passionate and right. Yates was patient and careful, making sure Katherine was comfortable, and when the initial pain faded, she found pleasure she had never imagined possible. Afterward, they lay tangled together, both a little stunned by the intensity of what they had shared. "Are you all right?" Yates asked, stroking her hair. "Better than all right," Katherine said honestly. "I did not know it could be like that." "Neither did I," Yates admitted. "I have been with women before, but it was never like this. This meant something." Katherine nestled closer, feeling a rush of tenderness for this man who was now truly her husband in every sense of the word. "Yes," she agreed softly. "It meant something." In the days that followed, they fell into an easy partnership. The weather remained cold but clear, and Katherine began to venture outside, exploring the immediate area around the house. Yates showed her the barn and the other outbuildings, introduced her to the horses, and explained how the ranch operated. She met the cattle, shaggy beasts who regarded her with placid indifference, and learned about the constant vigilance required to protect them from wolves, mountain lions, and harsh weather. She learned to recognize the signs of coming storms, to read the behavior of the animals, to understand the rhythms of this harsh but beautiful land. A week after the storm, Yates hitched up the wagon and they drove into Leavenworth for supplies. Mrs. Brennan greeted them enthusiastically, eager for news and gossip. She had told everyone in town about the wedding, and Katherine found herself the subject of much curiosity and speculation. "You look well, dear," Mrs. Brennan said, eyeing Katherine with satisfaction. "Marriage clearly agrees with you." Katherine felt herself blush but could not deny it. She did feel well better than she had in years. For the first time in her adult life, she was not constantly worried about money or survival. She had enough to eat, warm clothes to wear, and a comfortable home. More than that, she had Yates, who treated her with respect and kindness and growing affection. They spent several hours in town, purchasing supplies and visiting various establishments. Katherine was measured for 2 more dresses at the seamstress shop, and Yates bought her fabric, thread, needles, and other sewing supplies at her request. They stopped at the restaurant where they had eaten on that first day, and Mrs. Chen, the owner, congratulated them warmly. On the way back to the ranch, Yates was quiet, and Katherine sensed he had something on his mind. "What is it?" she finally asked. Yates glanced at her. "I was thinking about spring, about what we might do to make the house more comfortable for you. I could add a room, maybe, or expand the kitchen. I want you to be happy here, Katherine." "I am happy," Katherine said truthfully. "But if you are asking what I might like, I think a larger kitchen would be wonderful, and perhaps a porch where we could sit in the evenings when the weather is nice." "A porch," Yates repeated, nodding. "I could do that. I will start planning it out." "You do not have to do this just for me," Katherine said. "I am not doing it just for you," Yates said. "I am doing it for us. This is our home now, not just mine. I want it to reflect that." That night, as they lay in bed, Katherine said, "I need to tell you something." She felt Yates tense slightly beside her. "What is it?" "I think I am falling in love with you," Katherine said quietly. "I know we have only known each other a short time, and this started as a practical arrangement, but my feelings have changed. You have been so good to me, Yates. You have given me more than just shelter and security. You have made me feel valued and cared for. I wanted you to know." There was a long silence, and Katherine felt her heart sink. She had said too much, revealed too much. Yates was going to tell her that this was just a marriage of convenience, that she should not expect more than he could give. Then Yates rolled toward her, cupping her face in his hands. "Katherine, I have been falling in love with you since that first day. When I saw you standing there in the snow, looking so lost and so brave, something in my chest cracked open. I wrote to the agency because I needed help on the ranch, yes, but I also wanted a partner, someone to share this life with. I never expected to find someone like you, someone so strong and kind and beautiful. I love you, Katherine. I think I always will." Katherine felt tears slide down her cheeks, but they were tears of joy. She pulled Yates down and kissed him, pouring all her feelings into that kiss. They made love slowly, tenderly, affirming with their bodies what they had just declared with words. Winter deepened, and Katherine's life took on a routine that was both comforting and fulfilling. She woke each morning to Yates beside her, rose to make breakfast while he tended the animals, and spent her days managing the household and learning the skills she would need as a rancher's wife. She learned to bake bread in the temperamental oven, experimented with new recipes, and made good use of the sewing skills she had developed during her years in Philadelphia. She made curtains for all the windows, using cheerful calico fabric that brightened the rooms. She sewed new shirts for Yates and created a patchwork quilt from scraps, slowly transforming the austere house into a warm home. Tom and Louis became regular visitors, stopping by for coffee and conversation. Katherine learned that Tom had been a soldier in the war, like Yates, and had drifted west afterward, unable to settle back into his old life. Louis was from Mexico, having come north 5 years earlier seeking opportunity. Both men were skilled ranch hands and loyal to Yates. "The boss is different since you came," Tom told Katherine one afternoon when Yates was out checking fence lines. "Happier, more settled. "It is good to see." Katherine felt a warm glow of satisfaction. She was making a difference here, contributing something valuable beyond just the cooking and cleaning. She was helping Yates build a life, a future. In January, a cold snap hit that was so severe even the experienced ranchers worried. Temperatures plunged far below zero, and the wind howled day and night. The men worked constantly to keep the cattle from freezing, and Katherine kept hot coffee and food ready at all hours. One night, Yates came in half frozen, his face pale beneath the windburn. "We lost 6 head tonight," he said grimly. "Maybe more by morning. There is nothing we can do in this cold. The ones who could not find shelter will not survive." Katherine helped him out of his frozen coat and boots, then made him sit by the fire while she prepared hot soup. When she brought it to him, she sat beside him and took his cold hands in hers. "You did everything you could," she said firmly. "No one could ask for more." "Those animals are our livelihood," Yates said. "Everyone we lose means less income, less security." "We will manage," Katherine said. "We have each other and we have this ranch. We will figure it out together." Yates looked at her, something shifting in his expression. "How did I get so lucky?" he asked softly. "How did I end up with someone like you?" "I ask myself the same question every day," Katherine said. "I arrived here with nothing, Yates. You gave me everything. You gave me a home and a purpose and love. I will spend the rest of my life being grateful for that." They held each other by the fire, drawing strength and comfort from each other's presence. When they finally went to bed, they made love with a desperate intensity, affirming life and connection in the face of the brutal cold outside. The cold snap finally broke in February, and the world slowly began to thaw. Yates assessed the damage to the herd and grimly calculated their losses. They had lost 18 head total, not enough to ruin them, but enough to hurt. He would have to be careful with spending until they could rebuild the herd. Katherine tightened the household budget, finding ways to stretch their resources further. She started a small indoor herb garden on the windowsill in the kitchen, coaxing basil and oregano and thyme from seeds. She made soap from saved fat and lye, and she became expert at making something from nothing, skills she had learned during her lean years in Philadelphia proving valuable once again. "You are a miracle worker," Yates told her one evening as they sat by the fire. "I do not know how you make such good meals from such simple ingredients." "Necessity is a good teacher," Katherine said. "And I like taking care of you. I like knowing that you come home to a good meal and a warm house. It makes me feel useful." "You are more than useful," Yates said seriously. "You are essential. I do not know how I managed before you came." "Probably the same way I managed before I met you," Katherine said with a small smile. "You survived, but surviving is not the same as living." "No," Yates agreed. "It is not." March brought the first hints of spring. The snow began to melt, creating muddy rivers that ran down to the creek. The days grew perceptibly longer, and occasionally the sun had real warmth in it. The cattle began to move more actively, grazing on the exposed grass where the snow had melted. Yates began work on the porch he had promised, spending his spare hours cutting lumber and measuring. Tom and Lewis helped when they could, and slowly the structure began to take shape. Katherine watched the progress with satisfaction, imagining summer evenings sitting out there with Yates, watching the sunset together. In early April, Katherine made a discovery that filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. Her monthly courses had not come in 2 months, and she was experiencing morning nausea that had nothing to do with anything she had eaten. She was pregnant. She kept the knowledge to herself for a few days, wanting to be certain, but as the signs became unmistakable, she knew she had to tell Yates. She chose an evening when they were alone, sitting on the partially completed porch and watching the stars emerge. "Yates," she said quietly, "I have something to tell you." He turned to her, concern flickering across his face. "What is it? Are you ill?" "Not ill," Katherine said. "Pregnant. I am going to have a baby." Yates stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face, a smile so full of joy and wonder that Katherine felt tears spring to her eyes. "A baby," he repeated. "We are going to have a baby. You are happy?" Katherine asked, needing to hear him say it. "Happy?" Yates laughed and pulled her into his arms. "Katherine, I am beyond happy. I am ecstatic. Terrified, but ecstatic. How are you feeling? Should you be sitting out here in the cold?" "I am due in October, I think," Katherine said, laughing at his sudden protectiveness. "And I am fine. I am healthy and strong, Yates. Women have babies all the time." "But you are not just any woman," Yates said fiercely. "You are my wife, and I am going to take care of you, both of you." He placed a hand on her still flat stomach, his expression full of awe. Katherine covered his hand with her own, feeling the tears slide down her cheeks. This child, this new life growing inside her, was the final piece of the foundation they had been building. This was their future, solid and real and full of promise. The news spread quickly. Tom and Louis were both delighted, treating Katherine with even more careful respect. Mrs. Brennan, when they went to town, immediately began planning a list of supplies Katherine would need for the baby. The whole community, it seemed, was invested in this new life. "It is because you are well liked," Yates told Katherine as they drove home from town one day in May. "People see how hard you work, how kind you are. They want good things for you." "I never expected to find this," Katherine said softly. "When I got on that stagecoach last December, I was so frightened. I thought I was going to some harsh place where I would be alone and unwelcome. Instead, I found home. I found you." "I almost did not send for a bride," Yates admitted. "I thought about it for a year before I finally contacted the agency. I was afraid of letting someone into my life, afraid of being vulnerable. Thank God I finally took the chance." Katherine reached over and squeezed his hand. "We both took chances. We both gambled on something we could not predict, and we both won." Summer arrived in a rush of green growth and blazing heat. The cattle fattened on the lush grass, and the herd began to recover from the winter losses. Yates hired an additional hand for the busy season, a young man named Jack who was learning the ranch trade. Katherine's pregnancy progressed normally, her body changing in ways that fascinated and sometimes alarmed her. Yates was endlessly solicitous, insisting she rest frequently and not overdo. Katherine endured his fussing with good humor, secretly pleased by his attention. She spent the long summer days preparing for the baby. She sewed tiny clothes from soft cotton, made blankets and diapers, and transformed the small storage alcove off their bedroom into a makeshift nursery. Mrs. Brennan gave her a wooden cradle that had been in her family for generations, and Katherine polished it until it gleamed in the evenings. She and Yates would sit on the completed porch, and he would talk to her growing belly, telling their unborn child about the ranch and the life they would have. Katherine would rest her hand on her stomach, feeling the baby move and kick, and marvel at the strangeness and beauty of it all. "I want to be a good father," Yates told her one evening in August. "I want our children to grow up knowing they are loved and valued." "You will be an excellent father," Katherine assured him. "You are kind and patient and strong. Our child will be lucky to have you." "Our children," Yates corrected with a smile. "Plural. I hope this is the first of many." "Let me get through this one first," Katherine said wryly. "Then we can talk about more." But secretly, she loved the idea of filling this house with children, of building a large and loving family. She had been so alone for so long that the prospect of being surrounded by people she loved seemed like the greatest gift imaginable. September brought cooler weather and the start of preparations for winter. The men began moving cattle to lower pastures and checking the barns and outbuildings to make sure everything was secure. Katherine preserved vegetables from the garden she had planted in the spring, putting up jars of tomatoes and beans and pickles. Her pregnancy was becoming more physically demanding. Her back ached constantly, and she tired easily. But she refused to let it slow her down completely, determined to fulfill her duties as a wife and ranch manager. One morning in late September, Katherine woke to a strange sensation, a tightening in her belly that was different from the baby's movements. She lay still for a moment, trying to understand what was happening. Then it came again, stronger this time, and she knew. "Yates," she said, shaking his shoulder, "the baby is coming." Yates was out of bed instantly, his face pale. "Now, are you sure? It is too early. You said October." "Babies come when they are ready," Katherine said, trying to stay calm even though she was terrified. "You need to go to town and fetch Mrs. Brennan. She said she would help with the delivery." "I cannot leave you alone," Yates protested. "You must," Katherine said firmly. "I need her here." "And Yates, hurry." He dressed in record time and ran out to saddle his horse. Katherine heard him ride off at a gallop, and then she was alone with the growing contractions and her fear. She had heard stories about childbirth, terrible stories of women who died in agony, of babies who never drew breath. What if something went wrong? What if she had come all this way, found all this happiness, only to have it end here? She forced herself to breathe slowly, to stay calm. Women did this all the time. She could do this too. Tom appeared at the door looking worried. "Boss said the baby is coming." "What do you need, madam?" "Water," Katherine managed. "Lots of hot water and clean towels. They are in the chest in the bedroom." Tom sprang into action, grateful to have something to do. Katherine moved carefully around the house, timing the contractions, trying to prepare herself for what was coming. By the time Yates returned with Mrs. Brennan nearly 2 hours later, the pains were coming regularly, and she was beginning to feel truly frightened. Mrs. Brennan took charge immediately, bustling into the bedroom and examining Katherine with practiced efficiency. "You are doing fine, dear," she said reassuringly. "First babies take their time. It will be a while yet, but everything looks normal." Yates hovered anxiously, and Mrs. Brennan finally shooed him out. "Go keep Tom and Lewis company," she ordered. "This is women's work. I will call you when it is time." The hours that followed were a blur of pain and effort. Katherine had never experienced anything like it, the relentless waves of contractions, the pressure, the sense that her body was no longer entirely under her control. Mrs. Brennan stayed with her throughout, offering encouragement and practical advice, cool cloths for her forehead and sips of water. "You are strong," Mrs. Brennan told her during a particularly difficult moment. "You have been through hard things before. You can do this." Katherine clung to those words, using them as an anchor. She thought about everything she had survived: poverty, loss, fire, the journey west. She had not come through all of that to fail now. She would bring this baby safely into the world. She would. As twilight fell, the contractions intensified, and Mrs. Brennan told her it was time to push. Katherine bore down with all her strength again and again, until she thought she could not endure another moment. Then, suddenly, there was a release, and a thin wail filled the room. "It is a boy," Mrs. Brennan announced joyfully. "A healthy baby boy." Katherine fell back against the pillows, exhausted and shaking and overwhelmed with relief. Mrs. Brennan cleaned the baby quickly and wrapped him in a soft blanket, then placed him in Katherine's arms. He was tiny and red-faced and perfect, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that were trying to focus on her face. Katherine stared at him in wonder, unable to believe that this small miracle was hers. "Can Yates come in?" she asked Mrs. Brennan. "Of course, dear. Let me fetch him." Moments later, Yates burst into the room, his face anxious and hopeful. When he saw Katherine holding the baby, his expression transformed into something so tender and joyful that Katherine felt her heart might burst. "Is he all right? Are you all right?" Yates asked, approaching the bed cautiously as if afraid to intrude. "We are both fine," Katherine said softly. "Come meet your son." Yates sat on the edge of the bed and gazed down at the baby in awe. Hesitantly, he reached out and touched the tiny hand, and the baby's fingers immediately curled around his finger. "He is holding on to me," Yates said, his voice breaking. "Look at that. He knows who I am." "Of course he does," Katherine said. "You are his father." Yates bent and kissed her gently. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for this. Thank you for everything." They named him William after Yates' father, with the middle name Thomas in honor of Tom, who had been there when they needed him. William Ormond had arrived 3 weeks early, but was healthy and strong, with powerful lungs that he used frequently to announce his presence. The first weeks of parenthood were exhausting and overwhelming. Katherine had never been around babies much and felt constantly uncertain about whether she was doing things right. William seemed to cry constantly, and Katherine could not always figure out what he needed. She was sore from the birth and desperately tired from the frequent nighttime feedings. Yates tried to help, but there was little he could do beyond bringing her water and food and taking the baby for short periods when Katherine needed to sleep. He still had the ranch to run, and autumn was a busy time with cattle to move and preparations for winter to complete. Katherine sometimes found herself in tears from sheer exhaustion and frustration, convinced she was failing as a mother. But Yates was endlessly patient, reassuring her that she was doing wonderfully, that William was thriving despite her doubts. "Look at him," Yates would say, holding the baby up to admire. "He is growing already. You are giving him everything he needs. You are a natural mother, Katherine." Slowly, things became easier. Katherine learned to read William's different cries to anticipate his needs. She learned efficient ways to complete household tasks while caring for an infant. And she discovered a fierce, protective love for this small person that was unlike anything she had ever experienced. Winter came again, but this year, Katherine faced it with confidence. The house was well stocked with supplies, the cattle were in good condition, and she had a family to care for. She spent the long, cold days keeping the house warm and comfortable, caring for William, and working on small projects that made their home even more pleasant. Yates had become remarkably good at entertaining William, making funny faces and sounds that sent the baby into gales of delighted laughter. Katherine would watch them together, father and son, and feel such contentment that it was almost painful. "You remember that day I arrived?" Katherine asked one evening in January as they sat by the fire, William asleep in her arms. "When you said I brought enough." "Of course I remember," Yates said. "It was the most important day of my life." "I had nothing," Katherine said. "I was terrified that you would turn me away." "You had yourself," Yates said simply. "That was everything. That was more than enough." "I did not feel like I was enough then," Katherine admitted. "I felt broken and desperate and worthless, but you saw something different. You saw value in me when I could not see it in myself." "Because it was there," Yates said firmly. "It was always there. You just needed someone to recognize it, to help you see it." Katherine leaned against him, careful not to wake the baby. "We have built something good here," she said softly, "something real and lasting. I am so grateful for every moment of it." "So am I," Yates said, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Every single moment. The years that followed were full and rich. William grew into a sturdy, curious toddler who was fascinated by everything on the ranch. He followed Yates around whenever possible, imitating his father's walk and mannerisms in ways that made Katherine laugh. The ranch prospered. Yates was able to expand the herd and purchase additional land. They built a proper barn and improved the bunkhouse. Katherine's garden flourished, and she began selling preserves and baked goods in town, adding to the family income. In the spring of 1870, Katherine gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Margaret Rose. Where William had been a fussy baby, Margaret was calm and serene, sleeping peacefully and smiling at everyone. William was initially jealous of the attention his sister received, but Yates patiently taught him to be gentle with the baby, and soon the boy was proudly helping care for his sister. 2 years later, another son arrived, James, and 2 years after that, a second daughter, Sarah. Their small house had become crowded, so Yates added 2 more rooms and a larger kitchen, creating a sprawling but comfortable home that rang with children's laughter. Katherine sometimes felt overwhelmed by the demands of 4 young children, but she was never unhappy. This was exactly the life she had dreamed of during those long, lonely years in Philadelphia, a house full of love and noise, a husband who adored her, children who were healthy and thriving. She had learned to be an accomplished ranch wife, managing the household with skill and confidence. She could butcher a chicken, birth a calf, and shoot a rifle if necessary. She had become part of the community, known for her kindness and her excellent cooking. She had made friends among the other ranchers' wives, and was often called upon to help with births or illnesses. But more than any of that, she had found herself. The frightened, desperate woman who had arrived with nothing had been transformed into someone strong and capable and valued. She knew her worth now, not because Yates told her she was valuable, but because she could see the evidence of it in everything around her, in the children she had born and raised, in the home she had created, in the partnership she had built with her husband. One evening in the spring of 1875, after the children were in bed, Katherine and Yates sat on the porch they had built together all those years ago. It had been expanded now to wrap around the entire front of the house, with comfortable chairs where they could watch the sunset. "Do you ever think about that day?" Katherine asked. "When I arrived in the snowstorm." "All the time," Yates admitted. "I think about how close I came to not sending for a bride at all, how different my life would be if I had given in to my fears and stayed alone. I think about how close I came to dying in that fire," Katherine said. "If I had been asleep just a few minutes longer, if I had not heard the woman screaming in the hallway, I would never have made it here. I would never have met you." "But you did make it," Yates said, reaching for her hand. "You survived, and you came here, and you changed everything. You made this house a home. You gave me a family. You gave me a reason to build something lasting instead of just surviving day to day." "We built it together," Katherine corrected. "Everything good in my life exists because you were willing to take a chance on me, because you looked at a woman with nothing and saw someone worth keeping." "I saw someone worth loving," Yates said, "and I have never regretted that decision for a single moment." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. In the distance, they could hear the cattle lowing and the horses moving in the corral. Inside, their children slept safely in their beds. This was their kingdom, small but precious, built on love and hard work and the willingness to take chances. "I love you," Katherine said, as she had said 1,000 times before and would say 1,000 times again. "I love you too," Yates replied, bringing her hand to his lips. "More than I can ever properly express." The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. The children grew, learning to ride and work alongside their parents on the ranch. William, as the eldest, took his responsibilities seriously, often acting as deputy father to his younger siblings. Margaret was gentle and artistic, always drawing pictures or making up stories. James was adventurous and fearless, giving his parents countless scares with his climbing and exploring. Sarah was the baby, sweet-natured and affectionate, adored by everyone. In 1878, Katherine discovered she was pregnant again. She was 32 now, and she worried that this pregnancy would be more difficult than the others. But her fears proved unfounded. In December, exactly 11 years after she had first arrived in Leavenworth, she gave birth to twin boys, healthy and robust. "Twins," Yates said, staring at the two babies in amazement. "Katherine, you are a marvel. 5 children in 10 years and now twins. You are incredible." "I am exhausted," Katherine said with a tired laugh. "But yes, they are wonderful. What should we name them?" They named the twins Henry and Charles, and the older children were delighted with their new brothers. The house became even more chaotic and crowded, but Katherine would not have changed a thing. The ranch continued to prosper. Yates had become one of the most respected ranchers in the area, known for his fair dealings and the quality of his cattle. They had weathered droughts and harsh winters, market fluctuations and various crises, but they had always come through intact because they faced everything together. Katherine had maintained her sewing skills and had begun teaching Margaret and Sarah how to sew. She had also become known for her medical knowledge, having learned much from Mrs. Brennan and from books Yates ordered for her. She often helped sick or injured ranch hands and was sometimes called to assist with difficult births in the area. In the summer of 1880, Tom announced that he was retiring. He was nearly 60 now and wanted to spend his remaining years with a sister in Kansas City. It was an emotional farewell. Tom had been there from the beginning, had witnessed Katherine's arrival and their wedding, had helped with the children when they were born. "You built something real here," Tom told them the night before he left. "Something that will last. I am proud to have been part of it. We could not have done it without you," Yates said, shaking his old friend's hand. "You will always be family to us." Tom left the next morning, and Katherine watched him ride away with tears in her eyes. So much had changed since she had first come to this place, but Tom had been a constant presence, a reminder of those early, uncertain days. Lewis remained, now the foreman, overseeing the younger hands who came and went. Jack had married and moved to his own small ranch nearby. New faces came to work on the Ormond ranch, drawn by Yates' reputation as a fair and generous employer. The children continued to grow and develop their own personalities and interests. William, at 14, was already talking about attending agricultural college to learn modern ranching techniques. Margaret, 12, wanted to be a teacher. James, 10, insisted he was going to be a cowboy and travel with cattle drives. Sarah, 8, was still deciding, changing her mind every week about what she wanted to be. The twins, now 2, were into everything, keeping Katherine constantly occupied. Through it all, Katherine and Yates' love for each other only deepened. They still sat on the porch together in the evenings when they could, still made time to talk and share their thoughts. Their physical relationship remained passionate and affectionate. The spark that had ignited between them on their wedding night had never faded. "Sometimes I cannot believe this is my life," Katherine told Yates one evening in the fall of 1882. "That I get to live here with you and our children, that I have everything I ever wanted." "You deserve it all," Yates said firmly. "You deserve every good thing life can offer." "So do you," Katherine said. "You gave me a chance when you had no reason to. You looked past my circumstances and saw who I really was. That gift changed everything for me." "It changed everything for me too," Yates said. "I was just existing before you came, going through the motions of life but not really living. You woke me up. You made me want to build something more than just a successful ranch. You made me want to build a legacy, a family, something that would outlast us both." "We are building it together," Katherine said. "Every day, with every choice we make, we are creating something that will continue long after we are gone." They watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors, the cattle grazing peacefully in the distance, smoke rising from the chimney of their warm home. This was their empire, modest by some standards but priceless to them. It had been built on determination and hard work, on weathering storms both literal and metaphorical, on the decision to take chances and trust each other. In 1885, William did indeed leave for agricultural college in Iowa, the first of their children to venture out into the wider world. Katherine cried as they said goodbye, but they were proud tears. Her son was educated and confident, capable of making his own way in the world. That was what she and Yates had worked for, to give their children opportunities they had never had. Margaret followed 2 years later, attending a teacher's college in Kansas City. She wrote home regularly, her letters full of excitement about her studies and her plans for the future. James, true to his word, joined a cattle drive when he was 16, returning months later with stories of adventure and a new maturity. As the children grew and began their own lives, Katherine found herself with more time to reflect on the journey that had brought her here. She was 40 now, with gray threading through her hair and lines on her face earned through years of hard work and laughter. She was not the frightened young woman who had arrived with nothing all those years ago. She had become someone she could be proud of: a mother, a wife, a rancher, a healer, a valued member of her community. Yates, at 50, was still strong and capable, though he had slowed down slightly, delegating more of the physical work to Lewis and the younger hands. His face was more weathered, his hair more gray than brown now, but to Katherine, he was still the man who had wrapped his coat around her shoulders on that freezing day and told her she was enough. In the spring of 1890, William married a girl he had met at college, a smart, capable young woman named Ellen. They had a wedding at the ranch, with the whole community attending. Katherine looked around at the celebration, at her grown children and their friends, at the neighbors who had become like family, at the ranch that had grown from a modest operation to a thriving enterprise, and felt a profound sense of gratitude. "What are you thinking?" Yates asked, coming to stand beside her. "I am thinking about how far we have come," Katherine said. "About how this all started with a desperate gamble and became this." She gestured at the celebration around them. "I am thinking about how glad I am that I got on that stagecoach 23 years ago, even though I was terrified. About how glad I am that you were the man waiting for me when I arrived. Best decision I ever made," Yates said, pulling her close. "Sending for that bride, choosing you. Every single day since then has been a gift." "We have been lucky," Katherine said. "We have had challenges and losses, but we have had so much more joy. We have built something that will continue long after we are gone. Our children will carry on what we started here." "They will," Yates agreed. "We have given them roots and wings. They know where they come from, but they are free to become whoever they want to be." Margaret married the following year to a lawyer in Kansas City. She did become a teacher, working with children in a small school, but she wrote often about her happiness in her new life. James took over more responsibility on the ranch, proving to be a natural cattleman with an intuitive understanding of the animals and the land. Sarah was courting a young man who worked at the bank in town, and the twins, now 12, were already showing signs of wanting to follow their father and older brother into ranching. As Katherine entered her mid-40s, her role shifted somewhat. She was no longer the young mother with small children constantly underfoot. Instead, she was becoming the matriarch of a growing family, the keeper of stories and traditions. When William and Ellen had their first child in 1891, Katherine became a grandmother, a role she embraced with joy. "It is different than being a parent," she told Yates after spending an afternoon with her grandson. "You get all the joy of holding and playing with the baby, but then you can hand them back when they cry or need changing. It is wonderful." Yates laughed. "Wait until we have 6 or 7 grandchildren running around. You might change your mind about it being easy." But Katherine never did change her mind. As more grandchildren arrived from William and Ellen, from Margaret and her husband David, from James, who married a rancher's daughter named Anna, Katherine delighted in all of them. She told them stories of the old days, taught them to sew and cook and garden, and gave them the gift of unconditional love. The ranch adapted to changing times. New techniques and technologies were adopted. The house was expanded again to accommodate visiting children and grandchildren. A telephone line was installed in 1895, connecting them to town in a way that would have seemed miraculous in the early days. Through it all, Katherine and Yates remained partners in every sense of the word. They still made decisions together, still supported each other through difficulties, still found joy in each other's company. Their physical intimacy had changed with age. It was gentler now, less frequent but no less meaningful. They had learned to communicate entire conversations with a look or a touch, the result of decades of practice. In the summer of 1900, the whole family gathered at the ranch to celebrate Katherine and Yates' 33rd wedding anniversary. All 6 children were there with their spouses and children, 13 grandchildren in total, ranging from infancy to 9 years old. The house rang with noise and laughter, and Katherine moved through it all with a smile, savoring every moment. On the evening of the celebration, after the children were in bed and the younger adults were chatting on the porch, Katherine and Yates slipped away to walk down to the creek. It was a warm night, the sky full of stars, and they walked hand in hand through the darkness. "Do you remember walking here in the spring of our first year?" Yates asked. "You were pregnant with William, and you were so nervous about everything." "I remember," Katherine said. "I remember thinking that I could not possibly be as happy as I felt in that moment, that it could not last." "But it did last," Yates said. "It has lasted 33 years so far, and it is going to last the rest of our lives." "I know that now," Katherine said. "I have learned to trust in happiness, to believe that I deserve good things. You taught me that, Yates, you and our life together." They reached the creek and stood listening to the water flowing over the stones, a peaceful sound that had been the background music of their life here. Katherine thought about that frightened girl who had arrived in a snowstorm, about how she had been convinced she had nothing of value to offer. She thought about Yates' words, "You brought enough," and how they had proven to be prophetic. She had brought herself, and that had been sufficient to build an entire world. "I love you," she said, as she had said countless times over the years. But tonight, the words felt especially significant, weighted with decades of shared experience and enduring devotion. "I love you too," Yates replied, pulling her into his arms. "More now than ever. You have given me everything, Katherine, everything that matters." They stood there in the darkness, 2 people who had taken a chance on each other and had been rewarded beyond their wildest dreams. Around them, the ranch they had built together breathed and lived, the cattle settling for the night, the horses moving in their corral, the house full of their children and grandchildren. This was their legacy, built on love and trust and the simple truth that sometimes all you need to bring to a relationship is yourself. The years continued to unfold, bringing the joys and sorrows that are part of any long life. They lost friends to age and illness. They weathered economic downturns and droughts. They celebrated marriages and births and achievements. Through it all, they remained constants for each other, the center that held when everything else shifted. As they grew older, they gradually handed over more responsibility to their children. James officially took over running the ranch when Yates was 65, though Yates remained involved in decision-making for years afterward. Katherine passed on her recipes and techniques to her daughters and daughters-in-law, ensuring that the traditions she had established would continue. In their 70s, Katherine and Yates had more time to simply be together. They spent long hours on the porch, watching the ranch operate around them. They told stories to their great-grandchildren, passing on the history of the family. They took satisfaction in seeing how their initial gamble had blossomed into this large, thriving clan. "You have any regrets?" Katherine asked Yates one evening. They were both in their mid-70s now, their bodies slowed by age but their minds still sharp. Yates considered the question carefully. "Only that we do not have more time," he said finally. "I wish we could live forever, just to see what happens next with the family with the ranch. But regrets about choices made? No. I would do everything exactly the same way." "So would I," Katherine agreed. "Every hard moment, every challenge, it was all worth it to get here, to have this life with you." "You never did tell me," Yates said. "What were you thinking on that stagecoach ride before you arrived? What was going through your mind?" Katherine smiled, remembering. "I was terrified," she admitted. "I kept thinking that I was making the biggest mistake of my life, that I should have stayed in Philadelphia even though I had nothing there. I thought you would take one look at me, with no possessions and no prospects, and send me away. I had imagined a dozen different scenarios, and in most of them, things ended badly." "And then," Yates prompted. "And then you wrapped your coat around me," Katherine said softly. "And you looked at me like I mattered, like I was valuable just as I was. And you said those words that changed everything. You brought enough. In that moment, I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, things were going to be all right." "They were better than all right," Yates said. "They were perfect." "Not perfect," Katherine corrected with a smile. "We had plenty of difficult times, but perfect for us. Perfect because we faced everything together." They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands as they had for more than 50 years, watching the sun set over the land they had worked and loved. The ranch would continue long after they were gone, carried on by their children and grandchildren. But more than the physical property, they had created something intangible but equally valuable, a legacy of love, of partnership, of taking chances and building something beautiful from very little. As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Katherine leaned her head on Yates' shoulder and thought about that young woman arriving in a snowstorm with nothing but a torn bag and a tattered shawl. She thought about the journey from that moment to this one, about all the lives that had been created and shaped by the decision of two strangers to trust each other. "You brought enough," Yates had said, and he had been right. She had brought herself her strength, her capacity for love, her willingness to work hard and build a life. That had been sufficient to create this entire world, this family, this enduring love that had sustained them through everything. As they sat together in the gathering darkness, Katherine Preston Ormond felt the deep peace of a life well lived. She had started with nothing and ended with everything that mattered. And it had all begun with a snowstorm, a desperate gamble, and a cowboy who had seen value where she could not see it herself. That was enough. That had always been enough.